Hi, I'm here today at Microgrid 2020 Global with Patrick Lee, who is the co-founder and CEO of PXiSE, which is a Semper company. And we're going to talk a little bit about some trends. Patrick's going to share some of his insights with us today. Thanks for being here today, Patrick.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Wonderful. Let's dive in. So, what do you think have been the biggest influences on the microgrid market for this year, for 2020? It's been quite a year.
Yeah, it really has been a year, I think, with the pandemic around us. And I think what's interesting that we actually see activity gone up in terms of inquiry and interest. And I think for 2020, we continue to see a very strong interest in resiliency in application of microgrids. For example, in California, we have a university that are interested in microgrid when they confronted with fire threat to shut down the power, which may interrupt the teaching in the school. And then we also have utility who are interested in microgrid in the area that may allow them to shut down some of the power line that had high exposure to fire. And then among all, I think we also see a lot of interest in stacking value of microgrid in maximizing the return for utilities.
So it's both resilience and it's also an economic reason for pursuing a microgrid at this point in time in California.
Correct. Yeah, those are really the top ones that have come through my mind in terms of interest.
What about, are there challenges? Are there problems to overcome in this market?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think given the pandemic with restriction in travel, I would say project deployment tend to take a delay. However, we're still able to do some of the project. For example, recently we were able to deploy an employee for 2 weeks in Portland to complete a microgrid. I think some of the benefit, having a software-based microgrid that doesn't need a lot of commissioning time in the field, it really played to the advantage of able to do most of the work remotely. And so I think that's really one of the challenges, I think, particularly on international travel, where we want to make sure our employees are safe. So we take a lot of precaution to either slow down project or making sure that, all the T's are crossed, all the I's are dotted in terms of making sure employees are safe going there and coming back as well. And also making sure them when they're on site, how are they exposed to other people, whether they have the same safety measures, right? So it really opened up very new challenges for us in terms of microgrid deployments. I think on the other hand, when we start seeing more deployment of microgrids in front of the meter, where we call these more complex microgrids, there are still more learning in that area where the complexity increased significantly than a lot of the behind the meter microgrid that most people have piloted in the past.
So the front of the meter microgrid that you're working on, those tend to be more complex than the more common behind the meter sort of customer microgrid that we hear about. And has that been affected at all by the pandemic, or is that pretty much the same, complex either way?
Yeah, I think the complexity on deployment with pandemic is more of the commissioning part, right? I think the complexity of the front of the microgrid now involve usually a bigger linear boundary, for example, involving a medium voltage circuit that's part of a utility, where the network analysis now needs to be involved, as opposed to behind the meter microgrid. Most of the time, most of the microgrid solutions do not need to take into account a network flow analysis, for example. So I think that complexity really add to the deployments, maybe planning requirements, but that's something that we can overcome in our industry.
So given the drivers you're seeing for microgrids and given the challenges you're seeing with the pandemic, what's your overall sense of how the market is doing, and what's your, are you optimistic about the future of the microgrid market?
I really think the slowdown is very temporary, particularly with some of the campus microgrid for industry where they may be running a business that because business slowed down, they're delaying their project. But I think those time will pass because we're already seeing businesses adapting to the change, right? You see restaurant opening outside and you're seeing businesses trying to continue to survive through it. And I think the industry is pretty resilient in terms of adapting to the change. And so I see microgrid will come back very soon and come back even stronger because now they realize how important to have critical infrastructure supporting their operations. Because one of the challenge about pandemic is having personnel that can know and how to operate the system be available, on site. And so I think deploying microgrid, one of the benefits is to have more of an autonomous control to allow maybe less dependence on human beings. And so I think those will actually come back stronger than before in terms of a demand for microgrids.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Patrick. It's always so interesting to talk to you. I really appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunities.